The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for humankind, and not humankind for the Sabbath. That's what Jesus said about the Sabbath in Mark chapter 2. But what did he mean by that? What is the Sabbath really all about, and what does it teach us? Is the Sabbath just a vacation day each week where we can rest and rejuvenate for the 6 days to come or recover from the 6 days before? Is it just a day of vacation each week for us? But of course, vacation can take on a lot of different meanings. Annie and I, just a couple of weeks ago, were at the beach reminiscing a lot about how much fun and how hard it was to go on beach vacations when the kids were little. The packing of the bags for each of the 4 children, the loading of the car when that involved pack and plays and beach toys and inside toys and diapers and things like that. The 12-hour drive from Kentucky to the beach with kids in the back and all of those things that they would typically yell, things like, "Stop touching me," and "Are we there yet?" and "I have to go to the bathroom." And that was just getting there. The daily routine of sunscreening 4 different children, getting the sunscreen in their eyes and then giving them a bath and then sunscreening them again each day. And no matter how many times we would sunscreen them throughout the day, they would get burnt either way, and so we had to deal with the aftermath of all of that, not to mention feeding 6 people 3 meals a day in a kitchen that is not your own. Even on the beach, there was no rest for the weary. They always wanted to dig a hole or build a sandcastle or look for seashells, but most of all, our kids just wanted to be in the water and ride the waves. They were daredevils. And so it was a week of terrifying lifeguard duty while standing and being battered by waves. After 6 days of that, with everyone blistered and sore, mostly Annie and me, because with all of our focus on them, we forgot to sunscreen ourselves any of the 6 days we were there. We would load everything back into the car. We would drive the 12 hours home, only to arrive with bags of laundry, with sand in every pocket, and with a sermon to write for the next morning. That's what we called vacation. And we did it every year. And as bizarre as it sounds, we looked forward to it every single year. But let me tell you that there was one other thing that I looked forward to every year, and don't tell Annie that I said this, but every year I would look forward to Monday morning when I would go into my office and I would close the door and I would sit in peace and quiet. It was a really good first hour of the week. We had fun with the kids, of course, when they were little, but they're older now, and so it's a different experience. But Annie often joked in those years that when we got back, we needed a vacation just to recover from our vacation. What is the Sabbath? Is it just a day to lay around and rest and do nothing at all? The Sabbath was made for humankind, not humankind for the Sabbath. That's what Jesus said about it in Mark chapter 2. But what did he mean? What is the Sabbath really? It's a big deal, of course, especially in the Jewish tradition, but it really should be a big deal to us as well. After all, it's one of the top 10. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. In the Old Testament, there are all sorts of laws put around the Sabbath telling you what you can and cannot do on that day. But here in Isaiah 58, we get, I think, a really good description of what the Sabbath is really all about. If you refrain from trampling the Sabbath, from pursuing your own interests on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the holy day of the Lord honorable, if you honor it, not going your own ways, serving your own interests, or pursuing your own affairs, then you shall take delight in the Lord. In other words, the Sabbath isn't about you, and it's not about your personal piety, or at least it shouldn't be. Just like Annie and I came to realize that those vacations when the kids were little had nothing to do with our rest and rejuvenation on the Sabbath day, it isn't about you getting a good nap in. It's God's holy day, not yours. It's holy because it is set apart to remember and to honor God, not to remember and honor ourselves, and certainly not to honor the leader of the synagogue in Luke chapter 13. Jesus was in the synagogue that day teaching on the Sabbath when a woman came to him in so much pain that she couldn't stand up straight. So much pain that she had been bent over for 18 long years. Jesus saw her, and he said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." He laid hands on her, and she was healed, and it was a miracle for all of the synagogue to see. And it says in the scripture that she immediately began to worship God. But the leader of the synagogue was not pleased. In fact, it says that he was indignant. Can't you just see him? Can't you just hear his voice? There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, but not on the Sabbath day. Not on the Sabbath day. Jesus responds, "You hypocrites. Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox and his donkey from the manger and lead it to water? Ought not this woman, this child of Abraham, who has been suffering all these long years, should she not also be cared for on the Sabbath day?" You see, religious folks, while often well-meaning, not always well-meaning, but often well-meaning, sometimes lose the plot. They often elevate the law over the spirit within the law. They elevate the rules of a book over the rule of Jesus Christ as head of our church. But really, here's what I find incredible about Luke chapter 13. It's not the miraculous healing. It's not the self-righteous rantings of the leader of the synagogue. It's not even Jesus' response in calling them hypocrites. All of that is commonplace in the Gospels. What I find truly remarkable in Luke chapter 13 is this. Jesus called them hypocrites, and then in verse 17 it says, they were put to shame. You remember when shame was a thing? Remember when someone's hypocrisy would be pointed out publicly and they would have to amend their ways and their viewpoints? Remember when shame and hypocrisy actually existed in this world? Our text from Isaiah started this way this morning, right before this part about the Sabbath. This is what it says. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness and your gloom shall be like the noonday. What does the Sabbath mean? What is it really all about? It is a day that is set apart for God, a day set apart to be holy and to remember the commandments of God, not so that we can do whatever we please on the other 6 days of the week, but rather so that we can be more holy each and every day, so that we can be better disciples of Jesus Christ the other 6 days, just like we are on the Sabbath. In other words, it doesn't matter if you put on long robes one day a week and you piously guard the rules of the Sabbath if you aren't trying to live each day in accordance with the will of God. Obviously, the Sabbath is a big deal in Israel, especially among Orthodox Jews. But there are exceptions to every rule, even in Israel. One such exception is called pikuach nefesh, It's a principle that holds that human life is sacred, meaning that the preservation of human life overrides all of the other religious laws, including even the Sabbath. The principle of pikuach nefesh has been uttered often during this Israeli siege on Gaza, arguing that the war is necessary for the preservation of the lives of the Israeli hostages and the future preservation of the people of Israel. And that very well may be the case. But at what cost? And how do you weigh a human life? Does one religious principle trump all of the others? To preserve the life of a hostage, for instance, is it morally acceptable to take the life of a child? To decimate the morale of an enemy, is it acceptable to starve a widow? Does the preservation of life apply only to the people covered in the book? Or is it for all of the people created in the image of God? The Sabbath was made for humankind, not humankind for the Sabbath, for man to remember it and to keep it holy. Friends, the most recent death toll that I saw reported from Palestine is 62,000 people. 19,000 of those are children. 19,000. Gaza City is now officially in a state of famine. And yet the sacred principle of pikuach nefesh, the sanctity of life, still rolls off the tongues of those who are perpetrating the slaughter with no sense of shame whatsoever. And God weeps. And God weeps. And God weeps. And God weeps. I remember when shame was a thing, or at least I thought it was. When saying things like slavery was bad wasn't woke. When saying racist things was frowned upon. When the Confederate flag was still a symbol of hate in this country. When lying about elections or about pedophilia was something that would get you in trouble. I remember when shame was a thing. For many years, the Church of Jesus Christ in the United States of America has turned away from the theology of shame, and I think acknowledging, rightfully so, that we have damaged so many people by making them feel shame for things that were simply a part of who they were, a part of what God created them to be. But perhaps we've overcorrected a little bit. When it seems that nothing matters and anything goes, perhaps we have lost an important piece of what it means to be a disciple of God, an important piece of our theology, when it's the religious folks who are so often cheering the abuse of the immigrant and the widow and the orphan. Maybe it's time to make shame great again. I'll end here. The writer of the Gospel of Luke tells the story of the call of those first disciples in chapter 5. It's the one where Jesus gets into the boat with Simon Peter and he tells the disciples to drop their nets off the side and see if they'll catch anything. And Peter says, "We've been here all night. We haven't caught a thing." And Jesus said, "Would you just drop the nets?" And so they drop the nets and they catch so much fish that the nets begin to burst. And I think Simon Peter's response is extraordinarily instructive. Verse 8 says this: "He fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, 'Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man.'" Peter's first reaction when confronted by the very presence of God was to fall down upon his knees and proclaim, "I am a sinful man." And it was from that posture of shame that Jesus raised Peter upon his feet and then built the church upon his shoulders. These days, as I watch the news, I, as many of you probably do, ask myself often, have they no shame about a variety of people? And I've come to realize that I don't think it's that the church or the synagogue or the temple or the mosque were focusing in the past too much on shame. It's that the religious folks were so busy shaming already marginalized peoples that they neglected to look in the mirror and feel shame themselves, to humble themselves in the presence of God. We know what the Spirit of God is. We know what the Lord requires of us. Jesus broke the Sabbath law and healed the woman not out of obligation, but rather simply because he was filled with compassion for the suffering of another human being. May we, today and tomorrow and this fall and all this year, resist the temptation to become so religious that we forget to be Christians. May we resist the temptation to join the masses in paying lip service to the holiness of God while denying the holiness of the other in our midst, lest we be called hypocrites and be put to shame. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, the old song says, and all these things shall be added unto you. Let it be so. Amen.